So Chapter 9 is about molecular geometries, and later on we'll talk about different bonding theories because, believe it or not, there is more than one. With the first section of Chapter 9, we're looking at the VSEPR theory, and VSEPR stands for Valence Shell Electron Pair Repulsion Theory. Do you see why we now call it VSEPR instead of saying that whole big long line? The reason we look at geometries this way is because electron pairs will repel each other, and when they repel each other, they adjust molecular shape. They want the electron pairs to be as far as possible because the further apart they are from one another, the more stable they are. Electron domains. These are the electron pairs that you looked at in your lab. Electron domains are areas of valence electron density around the central atom. So we're going to look at our central atom only. It will result in different molecular shapes. We include bonding electron pairs, so that's shared between two elements. We also include non-bonding electron pairs. So these are the lone pair of electrons that will be on the central atom. One thing a lot of you had trouble with on the lab yesterday was recognizing that a double and triple bond will actually be considered only one electron domain. That is one area that the electrons are focused in, so we're not going to consider it three different bonds being three different electron domains. A single, double, and triple bond are all one electron domain. In the next tables that you're going to see and fill in, and the tables that you can look at in your book, tables 9.1 and 9.3, they all focus around this type of little symbol or way of expressing what's around the central atom. So the L in this formula stands for lone or non-bonding pairs, and then the subscript will be the number of lone or non-bonding pairs. A is your central atom, and B is your bonded pairs. How many bonded pairs of electrons are on your central atom? The bonding angle notations that will be used in the table are not exact angles. Instead, you're going to see less than a certain degree. That means that it's approximately 2 to 3 degrees less than the predicted, and then less than a certain degree means that it'll be approximately 4 to 6 degrees less than the predicted. And that's the way that you'll write them as well on your lab. You're not going to have an exact angle unless it's linear, which is exactly 180 degrees. Some of them will have an approximation in their bond angle. When predicting molecular geometries, you guys should be familiar with this from the lab that you've done the last few days. Your first thing you're going to do is sketch the Lewis structure. Then, once you have your Lewis structure done, you're going to count the total number of electron domains on the central atom. So bonding pairs of electrons, this is between two atoms, will be one electron domain. Non-bonding pairs of electrons, those are the lone pairs. That is one electron domain. A double bond is one electron domain, and a triple bond is one electron domain. We're going to use the arrangement of the bonded atoms to determine the molecular geometry then. All right, so let's start filling in and looking at the different geometries. Will you need to know the geometries? Yes, you will. You will also notice that down here I have hybrid orbitals. That is another bonding theory that we'll talk about a little bit later. Just make sure that you have it copied into your table if it's not already there. And we'll jump back to this part when we get to hybrid orbitals. If you've gone through and you've drawn up your electron domain or your Lewis structure, and you count your electron domains of that Lewis structure, and you see that you have two electron domains, the first thing you're going to notice is that you have a linear electron domain geometry. This third column here is your formula and molecular geometry column. The formula for this is A, B subscript 2. So this is based on that little formula abbreviation that I showed you on the very first slide. That means the central atom has two elements bonded to it with no lone pairs. The molecular geometry is very similar. The bond angle will be 180 degrees. And the examples of this are beryllium fluoride and carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is a double bond between each oxygen and carbon. But remember, double bonds are a single electron domain. So that indicates that we only have two electron domains with carbon dioxide. All right, when we have three electron domains, we have what is called the trigonal planar geometry. This shows that the X elements, the terminal atoms on this structure, are all on one single plane around the central atom. But when you get to three electron domains, you're going to see a change in molecular geometries, because now we can start having a lone pair. And when that happens, it's going to change the geometry. So looking at molecular geometry, if we have all three terminal atoms as actual bonded elements, then you're going to have a trigonal planar molecular geometry as well. So in this instance, the electron domain geometry and the molecular geometry will be the same. However, if one of those terminal atoms was actually a lone pair, here's your lone pair, then the molecular geometry of that molecule is no longer trigonal planar, but it's a bent geometry. And this angle here will be less than 120 degrees. Because what happens is the electrons here will push down on the other bonded elements and kind of squeeze them together, reducing that bond angle size. So this bond angle here is less than 120, but the bond angles here are 120. Examples of that would be BF3, which is a part of your lab that you did, Cl2CO, and the bent example here would be our nitrite ion. And a lot of these examples are ones from your lab, so I'm not going to draw them all out. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about will be a 4-electron domain. One of the most popular is CH4. This molecular shape is tetrahedral, and it has a bond angle of 109.5 degrees. When we look at bond angles, we're looking at the angles between the hydrogens. Here and here will be 109.5. 4 electron domains, the electron domain geometry is tetrahedral. And there's a few ways to draw 3D structures once you get to the 4 domains. This dash here is more like the element is behind the board or going back into the board, where this here is coming out from the side. And the same thing is true here, that this here goes back into the board and this is coming out. So we're starting to get more 3D shapes occurring once we get higher and higher into electron domains. If all 4 electron domains are bonded, then your molecular geometry is a tetrahedral. If 3 are bonding and 1 is a lone pair, then you get what's called a trigonal pyramidal. And if 2 of them are bonded and 2 of them are lone pairs, then you get what's called a bent structure. Water is that bent structure. That was the first example on our lab, where water, the H's are kind of bent down closer to one another. That's because water has these 2 lone pair up here that are pushing down on the H bonds and bringing them closer together. So when they push down, this bond angle here decreases from 109.5 to less than that. There's a few effects that the non-bonding electrons and multiple bonds will have on bond angles. Non-bonding electron pairs will exert a greater repulsive force on any adjacent electron domains, therefore compressing the bond angles. So that's what happens with water. Those two lone pairs push down on the hydrogen bonds and bring them closer to one another. Multiple bonds kind of do the same thing. They'll exert a greater repulsive force on adjacent electron domains, compressing the bond angle. The reason the multiple bond one occurs is because even though it's one electron domain, how many electrons are in that one domain on a double bond? There's 4, not just 2, there's 4. So there's more negative charges in that double bond. It's still one domain where the electrons are found, but there's more electrons in it. So it has more of a repulsive force on the other bonding atoms to the central atom and pushes them together. Once you get past the 4 domains and we start to get into 5 and 6, we're going to see a little bit of a change. These are the molecules with the expanded valence shells. These are the ones that can have the 5 and 6, where you draw the Lewis structures and there's 4 leftover electrons. What do I do with it? Put it on the central atom. The electron domains can point in 2 geometric distinct positions. You have the axial, which is 2 domains, and you have the equatorial, which are 3 or 4 domains, depending if you're looking at a 5 electron domain molecule or a 6. What I like to think of this as is the axial is the axis that goes straight down vertically through the central atom. Then the equatorial domains are the ones that, if you think of the Earth, where's the equator? Yep, right around the center. So the equatorial domains are the ones that kind of go around the outside like the equator does with the Earth. So we're going to have more bond angles with 5 and 6 than we did with any of the other domains. Here we have PCl5, phosphorus, because it is in the 3rd p orbital, can use some of the 3d orbital to create some bonds, so it can have more than just 4 bonds to it. This molecular shape is the trigonal bipyramidal. It has 2 sets of bond angles. It has equatorial, which is 120 degrees, and it has the axial, which is 90 degrees. So the axial ones are the green, so between the very top atom and to the side is 90 degrees. But the equatorial bond angle is the distance between each of the elements along the equator of the central atom. So when you're talking about a 5-domain molecule, you need to know that there's 2 different types of bond angles, and you also need to know what each one is and where they would be located. So here's our 5. Again, the name is trigonal bipyramidal. Looking at this, which color is the axial atoms? The green. And then the purple is what? The equatorial. All 5 electron domains are bonding. Then your molecular geometry is the exact same thing. It will be a trigonal bipyramidal. If 4 of the domains are bonding and 1 is a lone pair, it's called a seesaw. And if you look at it, this is your axial, the green, remember? And the B's come off like this. Doesn't it look like a little seesaw? With the seesaw, the equatorial right here is now less than 120, but the axial is from here to here will be less than 90. If 3 of the domains are bonding and 2 are lone pairs, then you have a T-shaped molecular geometry. Once you have 2 lone pairs with a T shape, you no longer have an equatorial bond angle because there's only 1 atom that is in the equatorial space. So this is the only one. There's no other one to compare it to get the equatorial bond angle. But we still have the axial, and this will be less than 90 degrees. If you have 2 electron domains that are bonding and 3 that are lone pairs, you now have a linear shape. And the axial will jump up to 180 degrees because you're looking at the bond angle between the two B's. Once we jump up to 6 electron domains, we're looking at an octahedral. That means that there are 4 domains around the equatorial space and 1 on each side of the axis. If all 6 are bonding domains, then you still have an octahedral molecular geometry, and each of the bond angles then with the octahedral are 90 degrees, whether it is axial or equatorial, it doesn't matter. They're all 90 degrees apart. If 5 of the domains are bonding and 1 is a lone pair, you have what is called square pyramidal, and now you're looking at bond angles that are less than 90 degrees. If 4 of the domains are bonding and 2 are lone pairs, then we have a square planar. That means that we do not have any atoms attached on the axial part of the molecule. We are back to 90 degrees. So between the B's here, it's a 90-degree angle. If 3 of the domains are bonding and 3 are lone, we have another T shape. And again, our bonding angles are decreasing now because of the electron repulsion. And I don't have it on the video, but hypothetically, if we had a 6 electron domain molecule that had 2 domains that are bonding and 4 that were lone pair, what shape would it be? It'd be linear. So essentially you would be losing this and it would just be linear. Now tomorrow we're going to talk about molecular polarity, and I do have a little activity on the computer to help you understand polarity. For some reason, dipole moments really confuse students, so I have a little online activity to help you with that, and we'll do a short bit of notes with molecular polarity tomorrow, and then we'll also do the software that helps you kind of check your answers on your lab.